Welcome back to our channel. Have you ever wondered what lies behind the glamorous facade of the famous Pawn Stars, the dazzling deals, and the priceless antiques? But not everything Rick Harrison hides is just for business purposes. Beneath that shiny exterior, there are dark secrets no one wants you to know. Imagine dark tunnels, rusty walls, hidden doors, and whispers in the shadows. Everything is just the prelude to a horrifying truth so chilling, it will take your breath away. A businessman has accidentally stumbled into a world he was never meant to know. What he uncovers will shatter your trust in everything you've ever seen on television. Watch now before all traces are erased. These insights come directly from my own experience. I'm not making any definitive claims, but if the following guesses are correct, the story of Rick Harrison won't end here. Let's dive in. Don't forget to leave a comment with a 1 if you sympathize with Rick Harrison, or a 0 if you have a different opinion. Like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss what happens next, where we'll reveal all the secrets in this story. Not everything Rick Harrison hides is for business purposes. Beneath the sparkling facade of Pawn Stars are dark tunnels, where an ordinary businessman accidentally stumbles upon secrets that the world is forbidden to know. Rusted walls, hidden doors, whispers in the dark. It's all just the beginning of a horrifying truth that takes your breath away. He digs deep into the earth and unearths his own fate. And what he uncovers will shatter your belief in everything you see on television. Watch now before all traces are erased. These are the insights drawn from my perspective. I make no firm claims, but if the following guesses prove accurate, Rick Harrison's story won't end here. There are journeys that begin with steady steps, only to have the spirit falter after those simple steps. And for the nameless worker, the day he agreed to work in the underground system belonging to Rick Harrison, everything seemed destined to be a test of courage far beyond anything he had ever encountered before. On that first day, Las Vegas blazed with suffocating heat. But beneath the layers of rock and earth, a completely different world awaited him. The entrance to the tunnel was perfectly disguised behind a massive bookshelf, where ancient books lay silently like mute witnesses to something meant to remain undiscovered. As the door quietly opened, the worker could only think to himself, "Every secret has a guardian." The staircase leading down into the earth was narrow and steep. Each step echoed loudly on the cold stone floor, resonating into the deep darkness, as if awakening things better left undisturbed. As he reached the bottom, a narrow, long corridor stretched out before him, winding like a giant snake, asleep beneath the lavish city. The faint light from the old incandescent bulbs hanging above barely illuminated the mossy walls. The air in the tunnel was thick, heavy with the musty smell of limestone and old wood, enveloping him like an invisible net. The worker skillfully adjusted the headlamp fixed to his shoulder, took a deep breath, and silently commanded himself to stay alert. This was a professional job, a survey and repair. Nothing more, nothing less. But any calm composure he managed to maintain quickly dissipated as he ventured deeper into the maze. The tunnels intertwined like a spider's web, not built for optimal storage or passage, but seemingly designed deliberately to mislead any intruders. Some corridors ended abruptly at newly built brick walls, while others narrowed to the point where only a single person could squeeze through, as if hiding something important. At a dark turn, The beam of his headlamp caught an unusual wet streak extending along the stone wall. His professional instincts prompted him to stop. As he lightly touched it, the mortar crumbled away, revealing old red bricks, starkly contrasting with the cold gray stone surrounding them. This was not part of the blueprint he had been given earlier. "Something old has been buried here," he murmured, an unsettling feeling creeping into his mind. As he continued to descend, the atmosphere grew strangely suffocating. The sound of his own footsteps echoed off the stone walls, but occasionally he would hear other noises, whispers so faint, like fabric brushing against stone. Sounds his rational mind tried to dismiss. Sometimes he would stand still for a few minutes, straining to listen, only to convince himself it was the creaking of old ventilation pipes under the weight of the earth. But deep inside, the worker knew these sounds were not random. The faint light and the gloom engulfed every corner of the tunnel system. Once, while inspecting a ventilation shaft, his headlamp flickered and suddenly went out, plunging him into complete darkness. He could feel his heart pounding, sweat breaking out on his skin despite the cold temperature underground. He quickly turned the light back on, its dim beam sweeping across a mottled wall where he thought he had seen a shadow flicker just outside his peripheral vision. Unable to abandon his task, he pressed on with his inspection of the tunnel structures. But the deeper he went, the more unusual things he discovered. Small, crescent-shaped holes were gouged deep into the walls, hollow like the blind eyes of the deceased, staring directly at him. Some heavy steel doors were locked tight, their old, worn locks stubbornly holding firm. In certain places, signs of hurried activity were visible, as if someone had attempted to block off the passages in a panic. Then he stumbled upon the most puzzling discovery of his initial survey: a rotting wooden door, nearly forgotten, in a secondary tunnel. As he cautiously pushed it, the old hinges creaked a chilling groan. Behind the door was a small, barren room with only a few pieces of fabric covered in dust and an old, faded photograph stuck to the wall. The person in the photo wore ancient clothing, with eyes staring outward, as if conveying a silent, profound message. Some places recalled a quote that flashed in his mind like a stern warning. The first day ended as the diligent workers withdrew from the suffocating depths. Under the pale yellow light of the late afternoon, the outside world seemed alien. Every cell in his body screamed for rest. But his mind was still haunted by what he had just witnessed. That night, in his desolate dwelling, the wind howled through the window, unable to drown out the undeniable truth. He had stepped into a place he should never have entered. Some jobs are just jobs, but there are some places that once you step into them, can never truly be left behind. Echoes in the dark. By day, light can overcome many things, but when night falls, everything that the mind tries to deny becomes harsh, sharp. The worker understood this well as he began his second day working in Rick Harrison's underground tunnel system. This time, he was better prepared. Backup batteries for the headlamp, a walkie-talkie, and even a small knife. Not because he feared the others, but because his primal instincts told him that inside the earth, anything could happen. From the first step down the stairs, he felt the atmosphere in the tunnel was completely different from the day before. Thicker, heavier, as if the stone walls themselves were holding their breath. And then, at the first turn, the sounds began. At first they were weak, rustling noises, a faint hissing like wind blowing through a crack. The worker stopped and listened intently. He shone the light into every dark corner but saw nothing but damp stone and thick cobwebs. Nothing, he told himself. Just the normal sounds of an old building decaying over time. But just a few more steps, and the sounds returned. This time, they were clearer. Footsteps, soft and intermittent, as if someone were walking right behind him, but always keeping just enough distance to avoid detection. The worker spun around, empty-handed. Only the cold beam from his headlamp swept across the rough stone wall. His heart pounded in his chest. Instinct urged him to run, but reason pushed him to continue. He adjusted his breath, gripped the headlamp tightly, and silently vowed, "Finish the survey quickly and get out of here before the sun sets." He turned into a narrow passage leading to an area he hadn't checked the day before. The hallway here was so low and narrow that he had to bend down to pass through. As he went further, the worker noticed something strange. The floor was laid with slate, unlike the rugged earth in other areas. On the walls, strange symbols were crudely carved with a sharp object. Spirals, inverted arrows, scattered numbers, like a code he couldn't decipher. A faint click echoed ahead, startling him. In the beam of his headlamp, he saw a metal door that had just moved subtly, as if being pushed from the inside. The worker stood frozen. No logical explanation came to him at that moment. If this place had been abandoned, why would a door move on its own? If no one was here, what could have caused it to shift? Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, but a sickly curiosity urged him to move forward. He carefully touched the metal door. It creaked open, emitting a sound that seemed to freeze the blood in his veins. Inside, there was only an empty room. A thick layer of dust covered the stone floor, but strangely, right in the center, there were fresh, small, deep footprints leading straight into the darkest corner. The worker felt as if he had accidentally stepped into a play where every action of his had already been scripted. He shone the light towards the footprints, but the dark corner revealed nothing but an undefined void. Uninvited, a shiver ran down his spine. He stepped back, closed the metal door, trying to shake off the feeling that he had just glimpsed a secret he was never meant to know. Back in the main hallway, the sounds grew clearer. No longer random noises, but a strange combination of whispers, like an invisible crowd gathering somewhere ahead. The worker stopped, pressed himself against the wall, and listened intently. The vague words, fragmented sentences drifted through the air, distant but familiar, like broken pieces of memories. He shut his eyes tight, forcing himself not to panic. In the darkness, every sense became unnervingly sharp. A cold breeze brushed against the back of his neck. He spun around, swinging the headlamp behind him. Empty, no shadows, calm. Keeping his composure, he whispered the only comforting mantra in that moment. But his heart refused to obey, pounding as if it might burst from his chest. In the end, perhaps the wisest decision of the worker's life was to turn back to the exit. No more checking, no more exploring, no more curiosity. Just leave. Leave quickly before an irreversible mistake happens. When the old wooden staircase appeared in the dim light of his headlamp, a wave of relief washed over him. Heavy but determined steps, the worker hurried up the stairs. But even when his feet touched solid ground, he dared not look back. because somewhere behind him, he was sure he had heard another set of footsteps, slow, perfectly in sync with his own. That night, curled up in his shabby house, the worker still felt as though someone was standing at the foot of his bed watching him. Although he never looked back, he knew that from the moment he stepped into those tunnels, he was no longer truly alone. There are echoes in the dark that never really go away. They just wait for the moment when we once again wander into that silence. The Forbidden Room, the third day of work. The worker's heart felt weak the moment he set foot on that creaky wooden staircase once more. There was something inside him that knew with a clear certainty. He was not simply conducting a survey of the infrastructure of an old tunnel system. The strange sounds, the unusual traces, the feeling of being watched, everything seemed to be slowly piecing together into a larger, much darker picture. He told himself that today he would finish all remaining tasks and leave this place for good. But deep down, he knew that his reason for returning was not just duty. It was a profound question that remained unanswered. What was Rick Harrison truly hiding beneath these tunnels? This time, the worker decided to explore the left side of the tunnel system, an area he had skipped the day before due to an unsettling hunch. From the moment he turned into the narrow passage, he noticed a clear difference. The temperature was significantly lower. Cold drafts seeped through the cracks in the stone, causing his skin to crawl. The further he went, the narrower and darker the corridor became. The fluorescent lights seemed deliberately removed, leaving only the beam from his headlamp struggling against the suffocating darkness. And then he stopped. Between the gray brick walls, there was a small metal door low to the ground, requiring someone to crouch down in order to pass through. There was no handle, just a small gap resembling an old-fashioned keyhole. The worker carefully reached out his hand. The thick layer of dust on the surface indicated that this entrance had not been used in quite some time. But as soon as his hand gently pushed, the door opened inward, as if it had been waiting for him all along. Inside was an astonishingly spacious room, hidden deep underground. The beam of his headlamp swept through the space, and what appeared before him left the worker speechless in silence for a few seconds. The walls were lined with shelves filled with artifacts, old wooden chests, bronze statues covered in green patina, and oil paintings tinged with the color of time. In the center of the room was a long table, on which lay a haphazard collection of old, leather-bound books and thick stacks of documents. A large, ancient map covered the entire surface of the table, marked with strange symbols. He bent down closer to examine it. It was a map of Las Vegas from the 1950s, but it included underground tunnels that did not appear in any publicly available planning documents. On the shelves, he recognized a few familiar items. A pocket watch engraved with the name of a famous general from the American Civil War, a collection of notebooks bearing the seal of a museum in New York that had been destroyed many decades ago. Clearly, these items were not just rare collectibles. They were fragments of history, fragments that someone had meticulously hidden. Before he could fully calm down, the beam from his headlamp shone on a corner of the room where the wall was covered with small surveillance cameras hidden beneath metal grills. They were all operational. The worker shuddered as he realized the entire tunnel system was being monitored continuously. Someone, or perhaps Rick Harrison himself, had installed this system not just to protect the artifacts, but to monitor anyone who entered. Not to keep the stuff inside, but to keep people outside, the worker muttered, the soft words echoing in the confined room. Yancey flooded over him. He realized he was in a place he was absolutely forbidden to be. Anyone discovering his presence here would result in consequences far beyond ordinary dismissal. He quickly scanned the room, trying to commit every detail to memory. The quantity of artifacts, the strange markings on the walls, even the documents detailing agreements and handwritten contracts with faded names, some belonging to famous figures he had only heard of in historical records. In a fleeting moment, he noticed a file marked with red ink and crudely handwritten words, "Deep assets, strictly private." His instincts warned him not to touch it, but curiosity, the very trait that had led him into this dangerous situation, urged him to open it. The file contained records of transactions involving items with dubious origins, along with a map of storage locations scattered across Nevada and Arizona. Names, codes, mysterious symbols. This was no longer just a collection, it was a network. A faint buzzing sound from the camera array snapped him back to reality. One of the cameras had just shifted its angle. Not by chance. Someone was controlling it. Someone knew he was here. There was no time to think further. The worker quickly shoved the file into his jacket, turned off his headlamp, and retreated toward the exit. He moved through the darkness, each step cautious, as if even the smallest noise could spell disaster. For the first time in his life, he felt the presence of primal fear. The kind of fear that made his heart race uncontrollably, his limbs tremble, and his mind scream for survival. This was no longer a job. This was a fight for survival. When the metal door slammed shut behind him, the worker didn't dare to stop. He ran, blindly, sprinting through the pitch-black corridors, crossing intersecting paths and decaying wooden stairs. No looking back, no thinking. There was only one goal: escape before the last door closed forever. And when the disguised entrance behind the bookshelf finally opened, the blinding light from the outside world flooded in, almost knocking him down. But he was out. He was alive. But deep down, he understood that he had unintentionally touched a world that should have been kept secret at all costs. The guards. From the moment he burst out of the tunnel's entrance, the worker knew he had made the gravest mistake of his life. But what caused deeper terror than the scene inside that secret room was the unavoidable sensation of being watched. Even as he turned toward the escape stairway, he still felt it, clearly. The presence of eyes, a distinct awareness, no longer the vague fear, but an invisible pressure bearing down on each step in the damp corridor, as if every stone, every wall was whispering his name. He emerged from the depths beneath the earth. But that feeling didn't lessen. On the contrary, it clung to every breath, every glance, every creaking door. The worker returned to his humble residence on the outskirts of Las Vegas, hoping for a place of refuge. But that very night, all illusions shattered. Around the witching hour, a faint sound echoed in the hotel hallway, the rhythmic, heavy footsteps. The worker lay still, not daring to move. Through the crack beneath the door, he saw a shadow glide past, stopping in front of his room for a few seconds, as if listening to the breath of those inside. Then the shadow disappeared. Sleep eluded him the entire night, and by dawn, the worker decided he must escape Las Vegas immediately. He hurriedly packed his things, stuffing the documents he had retrieved into his backpack. Before leaving, he checked carefully. No one was following him. No one was watching him. But the ones following him, as he had begun calling them in his mind, always knew how to hide until it was too late. His rental car sped down Interstate 15, away from the city of neon lights. He tried not to glance at the rearview mirror too much, but the unsettling anxiety still lingered within him. He had heard the saying, "Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not after you." Now he understood it with chilling clarity. The distance between him and Las Vegas grew, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. Instead, it simmered with an increasing intensity in his chest. At a desolate rest stop in the middle of the desert, he decided to stop and regain his composure. Sitting in the dilapidated diner, sipping his bitter coffee, he noticed something strange. The strangers around him, a man in a black coat sitting in the corner, a waitress occasionally glancing at him with eager eyes, all seemed to recognize him. Not with the usual curiosity, but with the gaze of those who had been warned beforehand. It was him. He left the diner immediately. He circled around to the back of the parking lot. His heart skipped a beat. A black SUV, tinted windows, parked not far from his car. The engine idled softly. Without needing to check, he knew they were waiting for him. The worker hurried into his car, locked the doors, and started the engine. But within seconds, the SUV slowly began to move, following him. He pressed the accelerator, speeding onto the highway. Behind him, the black car persisted in its pursuit, keeping a distance just enough to avoid drawing attention, but close enough to ensure he knew. There was no escape. The silent chase went on for hours, through barren deserts and gloomy, desolate towns. Each time he turned onto a side road, the black car stubbornly followed him, as if a part of the darkness was slowly swallowing him. Desperate, the worker thought about the documents in his backpack. Could they be the cause? What he witnessed in that forbidden room had torn them apart under a cover that should never have been lifted. Suddenly, a bold idea sparked in him. If they only wanted the documents, maybe he had a chance to trick them. He decided to take a dangerous gamble. Reaching a deserted stretch of road, he sharply turned onto a dusty path, weaving through low brush and stopping abruptly behind a large rock. He hurriedly stuffed the documents into a plastic bag, carefully hiding them beneath a moss-covered rock, and returned to his car just before the SUV arrived. As the black car approached, he pretended to check the engine, playing the role of a confused traveler. The SUV stopped for a moment. A window lowered slightly, revealing the sharp, assessing eyes of the person inside. They observed him, evaluated, and then, as if not finding what they were looking for, the SUV accelerated and disappeared in a cloud of dust. The worker stood still, sweat soaking his back, his heart beating wildly and unevenly. He knew the game wasn't over, but at least he had bought himself some more time. That night, he couldn't sleep. He just huddled in the old car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, staring into the darkness ahead, where every faint sound could signal an approaching threat. He had unwittingly stepped into a world where secrets were not meant to be revealed. And the Watchers, those nameless, faceless ghosts, would not stop until every trace was erased. Revelations. In the days after the highway chase, the worker lived in a state of constant evasion, frequently changing hotels, leaving no obvious traces, avoiding all electronic communication. He knew that one wrong move could end his flight, but he also knew he couldn't keep moving endlessly. A decision was inevitable. On a new moon night, in a dilapidated motel room at the edge of a deserted town, the worker dared to open the documents he had carefully hidden. He laid the yellowed papers out on the bed under the dim light of a night lamp. Gradually, the fragments of truth began to piece together. It turned out the underground system beneath Rick Harrison's property was not just a storage place for antiques. It was a link in a network of deep treasure troves. Physical assets, classified documents, and lost historical artifacts had been secretly accumulated over decades by influential individuals. Rick Harrison, with his vast network built through the TV show and antique deals, was merely a cog in a much larger mechanism. A note had deeply shocked him. The items hidden inside were not just historically significant. Some of them, according to the shaky handwriting in the document, were linked to highly classified Cold War-era experiments, things the government had tried to erase from all records. The worker read in stunned silence, his heart heavy with a mix of fear and anger. The tunnels held not just memories, they held power. The kind of power the Watchers, those invisible gatekeepers, would do anything to protect. And now, he had seen them. He knew of their existence. Perhaps from the moment he stepped through that secret threshold, his fate was no longer his own. Are you ready to face the dark secrets hidden for decades? Rick Harrison isn't just an icon in the world of antiques. He's a part of a much larger mechanism where secrets from the Cold War era are still being protected. Hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video so you won't miss the horrifying truths we're about to uncover. This could change everything you thought you knew. Don't miss out. The truth is ready to be revealed. Closing words. The price of secrets. The worker left Nevada in the early morning fog before dawn, as Las Vegas remained deeply asleep beneath the fading neon lights. He didn't look back. It wasn't necessary. What needed to be seen to know, he had witnessed with absolute clarity. The outside world continued to turn, as if no dark secrets were hidden beneath the layers of rock and soil. But for him, everything had changed. The looks from strangers, the wind howling through the trees, even the silence of the empty roads now carried a hidden meaning, as if the entire world was complicit in keeping the secret of what he had unknowingly uncovered. Though he had traveled far, he could still feel the presence of invisible shadows. A strange car parked across the street every time he changed hotels. A phone call that rang only once before being disconnected. A stranger lingering too long in the small grocery store when he bought a bottle of water. Small signs, but unmistakable. He knew that from that moment on, he was no longer just an anonymous worker. He had become a potential threat, a living witness who needed to be silenced. Some nights, in cheap motels, he dreamed of returning to those tunnels, the flickering headlights, the heavy doors, and the feeling of being watched by hundreds of invisible eyes. He dreamed of standing before the room filled with historical artifacts. But this time, the artifacts were no longer still. They whispered, they laughed loudly, telling stories that the world had forgotten. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He had considered revealing everything, bringing the documents to light, exposing everything. But then he realized that the truth, once exposed, doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just brings more chains. Some truths are prisons disguised as freedom, he recalled reading somewhere. And the Watchers were not individuals known for their compassion, so he chose to live in silence, hiding the truth like a silent scar on his soul. Part of him always wanted to believe that if he remained silent, if he just went far enough, he would be forgiven. He would be forgotten. But deep inside, the worker understood that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again in this life. A seemingly harmless Christmas decoration mission had turned into a nightmare that haunted him for life. When he entered Rick Harrison's lavish mansion, the worker did more than just hang lights and wreaths. He unintentionally uncovered dark secrets that had been hidden for years. Forbidden rooms, strange antiques. The gaze from an old portrait seemed to drain his very essence, and a silent alarm system turned every innocent curiosity into a trap he couldn't escape. Rick Harrison might smile for the cameras, but behind those closed doors was a world he never wanted you to see. This truth will erode your trust in every wall, every smile. Do you have the strength to face the darkness? The shock has only just begun, and here are the insights drawn from my perspective. I make no definitive claims, but if the following speculations prove true, Rick Harrison's story will not end here. The Christmas job had turned into a nightmare. Winter in Las Vegas, far from the snow-covered streets of Rome or the Christmas nights bathed in light in Paris, brought with it a cold, dry, lingering sense of artificiality, like everything else in that place. Yet even in one of the most artificially created cities in America, stories remain so deeply embedded they can make anyone shiver. A young merchant named Daniel, a pseudonym for security purposes, had accepted what seemed like a simple job, decorating Rick Harrison's mansion for an exclusive Christmas gathering. When he signed the contract with the private service company, Daniel had no idea that just a few days into the job, his life would be changed irrevocably. On his first day, Daniel drove the small truck loaded with decorations to Summerland, where Rick Harrison owned one of the most lavish mansions in Las Vegas. A vast estate with its own private security gate, surveillance cameras monitoring every corner, and a discreet security team stationed throughout the grounds. The gate opened as he swiped his access card without any exchange of words. No one appeared to greet him. No laughter, no music, only an eerie silence that welcomed him. The moment he stepped into the grand foyer, Daniel could feel the unsettling atmosphere, not because of the cold stone walls or the seemingly endless corridors, but because of the very air itself. It was thick, as if permeated with some invisible pressure. He began his work by hanging wreaths around the main entrance. Daniel's gaze kept drifting towards the locked rooms down the hallway. Unlike the other mansions he had decorated for VIP clients, where doors were wide open to showcase luxurious interiors, here there were doors with electronic locks, separate keypads, and signs indicating they were for authorized personnel only. Daniel told himself, "Just do your job and don't question anything." But curiosity, like a small snake, slithered into his thoughts at every moment. While moving a large fir tree into the living room, the centerpiece of the Christmas display, Daniel noticed another strange detail. A significant portion of the furniture in the house was covered in black velvet. It wasn't just the usual dust cover, but thick, luxurious fabric, as though it was hiding something far more important than ordinary possessions. Large paintings were covered. Glass shelves were empty, but the faint outlines of items once displayed still lingered. An old piano, with its keys covered in fine dust, seemed to have been forgotten for a long time. Daniel asked one of the security guards, a large man wearing black sunglasses even indoors. The guard just shook his head and replied briefly, "Stay within your assigned area." Daniel continued his work, but the strange feeling grew. He noticed that the security cameras weren't just recording the usual entry and exit points, but were also sweeping the entire living space, even isolated areas like the side hallways or narrow stairs leading down to the basement. Once, while climbing the stairs to hang lights in the side foyer, Daniel accidentally saw a faint light coming from the crack beneath a locked door. It wasn't the usual light from the lamps. It was a flickering, dim glow, almost as if from a small flame or some old malfunctioning device. Moments later, the light disappeared as if it had never existed. On his third day of work, when Daniel was bringing decorations up to the second floor, an even stranger event occurred. One of the previously locked doors now stood ajar. A cold sensation ran down his spine. He hesitated, fully aware that he shouldn't be doing this, but couldn't resist the urge to look inside. Inside, Daniel briefly saw large racks filled with strange objects, heavy sealed wooden boxes, peculiar statues, and nameless paintings covered in thick dust. A strange smell emanated, the scent of decayed paper, old leather, and rusted iron. The smell of time, of things that didn't belong here, or perhaps didn't even belong to this era. The door slammed shut with a cold snap before Daniel could take another step. He stood frozen in the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest, his breath quickening as if he had just sprinted. A thought briefly flashed through his mind. This wasn't just a house. It was a repository of forbidden memories. That night, when Daniel returned home, he sat silently, staring at the unfinished wreaths and flickering lights. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the silent fear eating away at his sanity. He had seen things he should not have seen. This was not a normal Christmas job. It was the doorway to a secret world where even the slightest touch could lead his life down an irreversible path. And Daniel understood that from that moment on, he had inadvertently become part of a story he never wanted to be mentioned in Chapter 2. Some doors were never meant to be opened. Some doors were never meant to be opened. Daniel should have understood that. But sometimes, in the fleeting moment between curiosity and reason, a single wrong step could lead you to a world you can never return from. That day, Las Vegas experienced an unusual cold front. The sky was gloomy, and the wind howled through every crack like invisible whispers. Rick Harrison's mansion was even colder and more oppressive. As a result, no one remained in the house except Daniel and a rotating security team. While he was hanging miniature crystal chandeliers in the second-floor hallway, from the corner of his eye, he once again noticed something unusual. A door which had been locked tight and marked as restricted for the past few days, now inexplicably opened like a jar. No sound accompanied its movement. No invitation was extended. It was as if the house itself was breathing and beckoning him to enter. Daniel paused his work and glanced around. No one seemed to notice. No security cameras pointed directly at this side hallway. A level of surveillance that to him seemed too intentional. His heart pounded in his chest. His reason screamed at him to turn away and pretend to know nothing. But his feet moved forward irresistibly, as if pulled by some invisible force. The door creaked open wider as he touched it. A cold draft emanated from inside, carrying the smell of decaying time, rusted metal, and rotting leather. Inside was a small room, dim light filtering through heavy curtains, creating long beams that wavered in the dusty air, and right in the center of the room was a marble bust sitting on a rotting wooden pedestal. The face of the bust, cold and intense, depicted an ancient Roman man. On the pedestal, a deep crack ran from the forehead to the chin, like a scar of time. Beside the bust, covered by a coarse linen cloth, lay a golden cross inlaid with uncut gemstones. The faint light shone through, causing it to emit a strange, dim glow. Daniel cautiously approached, his hands trembling slightly as he gently lifted the cloth. Beneath the cloth was an old handwritten label. The ink had faded and smeared. Personal collection, legal status pending. A short inscription, yet it hinted at a legal quagmire that could swallow anyone who got involved in it. At that moment, Daniel realized these objects weren't meant to be displayed publicly. They belonged to another underground world, where lost treasures, stolen heritage, and hidden memories were kept in silence. He quickly glanced around the room. Heavy wooden crates were scattered dangerously. Some still bore postmarks from distant cities: Marseille, Palermo, Istanbul. Some had jar lids revealing strange artifacts: stone masks, bronze axes, tattered scrolls covered with strange symbols. Daniel suddenly recalled the rumors surrounding Rick Harrison, whispered by the international press, that he, with his extensive connections in the antique trade, had dealt with sensitive items, objects with dubious origins, lacking proper documentation, and sometimes better left undiscovered. Collectors referred to such items with an ominous term, lost provenance treasures. Suddenly, at the far end of the room, Daniel noticed a large, dusty old safe. It had a faded seal on it. Seizure order, 1998, France. He stepped back. A primal fear surged through his veins. He realized he was standing in a room filled not only with antiques, but with untold stories. Stories that people had traded freedom, fame, and even their lives to conceal. Daniel took a deep breath and turned to leave. But as he stepped through the threshold, he felt as if the invisible eyes of those old objects were watching him, engraving his presence into their silent history. And he knew from that moment on, he had become tangled in a secret that was not easily erased. Stepping out of the dark hallway, Daniel felt as if the mansion itself were alive. The walls whispered, the hallways subtly moved, and shadows crawled along his footsteps. He returned to his work, trying to focus all his attention on hanging the lights and arranging the wreaths. But his hands trembled, and his gaze continually shifted to the hallway where the fateful door stood. A voice repeated in his mind like an urgent warning. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And Daniel understood that this Christmas would not be a season of light and hope, but a season of the darkest secrets he had unwittingly fallen into. The portrait was watching him. There are things in a house that should remain untouched, not for their monetary value, but because they hold the darkest memories, the lingering remnants of restless souls. Daniel, since breaking into the forbidden room, had understood this more deeply than most people. But some lessons, even when known, require a personal price to fully comprehend. The next day, his task was to hang a large wreath along the main hallway of the mansion, the path leading to the living room where the enormous Christmas tree stood. A simple task. But in the middle of that hallway, Daniel encountered something he would never forget for the rest of his life. The portrait was covered. The painting hung majestically on the wall opposite the grand foyer. A thick black velvet cloth completely covered the painting from top to bottom, leaving no detail exposed. There was no description plaque accompanying it. No one mentioned it in the work instructions. If Daniel hadn't been paying attention, he might have just thought of it as a forgotten decoration in the cold atmosphere of the mansion. But as he hung the wreath on the hook next to the cloth, a gentle breeze from an undetectable source blew through, briefly lifting one corner of the cloth. Just for a moment, but long enough for Daniel to see a pair of eyes. Not the eyes of a fictional character, nor the eyes of typical decorative art. These were eyes full of life, as if painted with blood and tears. As if they knew. They sensed the gaze of the observer. Daniel froze. Cold sweat ran down his spine. Driven by foolish yet irresistible curiosity, he gently pulled the cloth down. The portrait was fully revealed under the dim hallway lights. A middle-aged man dressed in Victorian attire, a long black coat, a white lace-collared shirt, holding a silver-topped cane. But what made the portrait unsettling was not the clothing or the posture, it was the eyes. The eyes were so skillfully painted that they seemed to possess a soul. The gaze was not just looking off into the distance. It looked directly at Daniel with a cold mixture of anger, contempt, and profound sadness. Daniel instinctively stepped back, but no matter which way he turned, those eyes followed him like an unanswerable question. As Daniel's hand hovered in midair, a soft sound echoed from the end of the hallway, the sound of a door quietly closing. No figures appeared. Only the sound of his own footsteps echoed on the cold stone floor. He suddenly recalled the whispers among the internal maintenance staff in Las Vegas. There were stories of a cursed portrait in Rick Harrison's mansion, an antique that its former owner had tried to destroy but failed. It was rumored that anyone who dared to touch it would meet bad luck, losing their job, going bankrupt, or even experiencing inexplicable accidents. It was all just rumors, Daniel reassured himself. But as he turned away, the feeling of those eyes still clung to him, vivid, sharp, like an invisible blade pressing against his neck. He tried to finish the remaining tasks, his heart pounding, his movements clumsier than usual. Every time he glanced towards the hallway, every time those eyes seemed to pierce through his efforts to stay calm. And in a brief moment of confusion, Daniel almost heard a faint whisper, weak but undeniably real, emanating from the painting. He shouldn't be here. That night, back at his small apartment in the Henderson suburbs, Daniel tossed and turned, unable to sleep. No matter how long he closed his eyes, the image of those eyes remained in his mind, always present, as if etched into his subconscious. He dreamt he was lost in an endless dark hallway, with doors continuously appearing and disappearing. By the end of the passage, the portrait was waiting, and those eyes were no longer just looking at him. They were pulling him towards them with an irresistible force. Daniel woke up, drenched in sweat, his heart pounding as if it might explode. He knew that from the moment he lifted that cloth, something had changed forever. Not just in that mansion, but in himself. Daniel thought of the old saying, the one Rick Harrison had often cheerfully quoted on Pawn Stars. Sometimes, you don't own the object owns you. Now he understood with painful clarity that sometimes the price of a moment's curiosity is not just fleeting fear, but an obsession that will last forever, like an unbreakable curse. The sound of the silent alarm had changed everything. A residence, especially one as fortified as Rick Harrison's mansion, was not only protected by locks and steel fences, it was reinforced with layers of invisible alerts, sophisticated traps for the curious, whether by accident or design. Daniel had believed he could avoid them. He had reassured himself that he just needed to complete the task, leave, and erase everything from his mind. But in environments like this, a single wrong step could lead to complete collapse. On that particular day, his task was to transport a large Christmas tree from the auxiliary garage into the grand foyer, where it would be magnificently decorated for the extravagant guest Rick Harrison planned to entertain. The fir tree had been temporarily placed in a corner of the courtyard, only a few steps away from the main living room. Daniel, using a small trolley, tried to move it through the narrow passage leading into the living room. Everything went smoothly until he accidentally pushed the trolley too close to a marble wall. A faint click echoed. Daniel froze. His whole body stiffened. There was no loud alarm, no flashing lights, just a dry, cold sound, as if an invisible switch had been flipped. For a few seconds, he tried to reassure himself. Perhaps it was just the internal security system for the entrances and exits. Maybe no one had noticed. He quickly placed the Christmas tree, trying to act as naturally as possible. But the moment he turned his back, Daniel knew he had made a mistake. From the end of the hallway, 3 men in dark suits without name tags and smiles were walking straight toward him. No greeting was offered. No polite questions were asked. Only cold, steel-like eyes and deliberate gestures demanding that he remain still. One of them, seemingly the leader, held out a small handheld device, scanning Daniel's body as if checking for traces. The others opened laptops, quickly typing commands, and Daniel could recognize the familiar hum of an internal security system being checked. Within minutes, Daniel's entire file had been retrieved. Name, address, job history, even GPS tracking data from his personal phone. He was moved to a corner, sitting on a chair like a criminal. No one yelled. No one interrogated him. Only an older man, dressed casually but with cold eyes, approached and handed Daniel a document. An NDA, a pre-printed non-disclosure agreement, a confidentiality contract requiring only a signature. Daniel's hand shook as he took the pen. He skimmed through the content, a commitment not to disclose any details about what he had seen, heard, or experienced while working at the mansion. Violations would result in civil penalties up to millions of dollars, along with potential criminal prosecution if evidence of trade secrets leaked or personal property appeared. No legal counsel was present, no time to reconsider, only one choice left: sign or face the consequences. Daniel signed. His hand shook so violently that his signature appeared broken on the paper. Immediately after signing, he was escorted out of the mansion, barred from returning to the main living areas. His job was abruptly terminated. The contract was fully paid and completed on the spot. On his way out of the facility, Daniel looked back one last time at the mansion. The house, with its cold stone walls and towering arches, no longer symbolized wealth. It resembled a fortress, or more accurately, a secret prison, where anyone who entered could be trapped forever by things they were never meant to know. That night, Daniel sat alone in his cramped apartment, staring intently at the copy of the NDA he had secretly kept. At the top, the bold text read, "Any violation of this agreement may lead to immediate legal action without prior notice." He knew he had unwittingly become part of a much larger game than he could ever have imagined. It wasn't just the vague antiques, not just the look in a portrait, but the entire network of secret deals, silent agreements, layers of truth hidden beneath the polished facade of fame. A network that Rick Harrison, despite his charming and witty TV personality, could not entirely escape from. Daniel understood that from the moment he signed that document, he had become a part, albeit a small one, of the darkness surrounding the pawn shop and the mysterious mansion. And the price of curiosity, the cost of unintentionally touching that gilded facade, would haunt him for the rest of his life. Not every alarm makes a sound. Some simply change your existence forever. Christmas never came. A week before Christmas, Rick Harrison's mansion was supposed to be brightly lit, filled with music and echoing with festive cheers. Instead, a suffocating, stifling atmosphere enveloped the people as if the house itself was burning itself down. The extravagant celebration that Rick had planned, widely publicized among Las Vegas's elite business circles, was suddenly canceled, communicated to guests via a TUR email. Due to unforeseen technical issues, the Christmas party was canceled. Thank you for your understanding. No explanation was given. No apologies were issued. But those familiar with the secretive higher-ups understood. When such a well-prepared event is canceled at the last minute, it's never just due to technical problems. Inside the mansion, security had been noticeably increased. Windowless trucks were frequently entering and exiting during the night, transporting heavy crates, hurriedly packed, with no labels. Insider sources revealed that an internal asset inventory had begun right after the alarm incident Daniel accidentally triggered. Some items in Rick's personal collection were identified as potentially causing legal disputes, requiring immediate relocation or handling before official monitoring could proceed. Rick Harrison did not appear before the public for many days afterward. His social media posts, once full of party pictures and purchased antiques, suddenly stopped. Gold and silver pawn shop also began unusually reduced operating hours, citing system maintenance. Around the city, rumors spread like wildfire across the desert. Some VIP guests who had received invitations to the Christmas party whispered that Rick was facing extremely sensitive asset issues. Others whispered that the mansion had been disinfected, with all items that could cause trouble being removed before any official investigation could take place. For Daniel, the anonymous Christmas decorator, it was the first Christmas in his life that he wished he could forget. There was no sparkling Christmas tree, no bright wreaths, only nightmares and cold memories of a house where Christmas lights could never illuminate the darkness that had taken root inside its stone walls. Haunted by secrets, what Christmas work really reveals. Not all ghosts appear at midnight. Some exist in the mind, in memories, and haunt a person for the rest of their life. For Daniel, the experience at Rick Harrison's mansion wasn't just a failed Christmas job. It was a silent turning point, marking the day he said goodbye to his naive worldview, stepping into a different reality where secrets are more valuable than money and deeper than truth. He realized that everything he had once trusted could be distorted under the veneer of glitter. Rick Harrison, once the symbol of authenticity in the world of antiques, now appeared to Daniel as a complex figure torn between legacy, ambition, and an unspeakable truth. Daniel understood that the mansion, with its cracked statues, watchful portraits, dusty safes, and secret alarm systems, was not just a house. It was a storage place for things that shouldn't exist. A place where secrets too heavy to carry had to be locked away, confined and buried beneath layers of extravagant artifacts. A phrase echoed continuously in Daniel's mind like a curse. Not all treasures should be found. Not all herds should be unearthed. Not all truths should be revealed. And not every wound can be healed over time. Years later, every Christmas, as he looked at the sparkling trees across the city, Daniel still felt an emptiness inside. Because for him, Christmas was no longer a season of hope. It was a season to remember the unblinking gaze in the old portrait of the open door leading to the underground world he should never have entered. Rick Harrison's mansion is now only mentioned as a vacant address on the list of high-end properties in Las Vegas. But in the minds of those who had once entered, it remains as vivid as an indelible scar. Daniel never revealed what he had witnessed, not because of the NDA he signed that day, but because he understood that some truths, when spoken, not only destroy others, but also burn his own soul. And perhaps sometimes, silence is the final form of salvation. Some secrets should never be revealed. Some truths should remain buried. What do you think? Should some secrets be kept hidden, or do they need to be revealed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Stay tuned, because these mysteries are far from over. Thank you for watching this video. If you were captivated by the story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss any secrets soon to be uncovered. Don't forget to leave a comment with a 1 if you sympathize with Rick Harrison, or 0 if you have a different opinion. Share your thoughts in the comments, as we have even more shocking revelations waiting for you. See you in the next videos.